I'm just hopping on for a second before I go to bed because the pup wants to go to bed here in a little bit. But uh, I want to see kind of what people's thoughts are on this. I was thinking about this pretty much the last few days. So most condition type builds for the warrior especially, it's just normally sword, shield, bow. And then most might generation type builds are like great sword, rifle. Um, but I'm thinking about a might generation healing type of condition build using the mace. So you go double sword, double mace, potentially. And I think it's something that's kind of interesting because burst skill wise, I mean, this would make good sense. But if you were ever going to do skill reflection, you'd have access to the mace block, counter blow, and you'd have access to reposit with the double swords. You could still go sword shield, but it would have a longer cooldown for what we're trying to do. But basically, if you look at impale, and then you rip your sword from the target, when you rip the sword from your target, you get 10 stacks of might, which is actually quite a lot of might. But the main issue with the build so far is that we're planning on making it might generation. So we could, I mean, basically, if we do everything with the maximum amount of healing, we have limits on what we can do. But if we're doing if we're by ourselves, we could potentially increase our overall like damage and might generation and everything else, or at least damage wise. Um, but like this, for instance, we would be able to say uh, reduce the cooldown of it. So it's like 8 seconds or something right now. We could possibly go down to like 6 or something like that. But the other thing is that if you're playing solo as well, the arms trait generally, like when we have our sword skill, you can do when you do a critical hit, you get condition damage, or you can have your burst skills deal 100% crit damage, or there's one if you will two of the same, like an offhand weapon, you get 20% attack speed. So I think that's interesting in and of itself for this build in particular because that 20% flat attack speed would give you more bleed stacks faster without the need for quickness. I don't know if they stack or not, but then also the increased condition damage could be good as well. But the difference would be is that if you go for the increased condition damage, you're going to do more total damage. True. But if you go for the 20% attack speed bonus, you're going to apply the bleeding stacks and get more adrenaline quicker. And then when it comes to the mace skills like this, you would basically be able to attack quicker with your mace to get the chain off. And then this one, the thrash, is the big one. So it's saying that this whole sequence takes about 3 seconds. So let's go and look at the sword skill real quick. Sever artery. Whole sequence takes about 1.85 seconds. And that's pretty good. I mean, that's a pretty low cooldown when it comes to auto attacking. 1.85 seconds. So 1.85 seconds. And we can look at, say, like the axe skill line. This whole sequence is 3.6 seconds. We can see it gets a 0.7 on the damage increase. And if we go back to the mace skill, you're getting a 0.8 on the damage increase. And then say we go and do, so like if you're going to do might generation, the greatsword and the rifle give the most total might generation in general, with all the trait lines and stuff, right? But then I got to thinking about it. So with the greatsword, you can have might on crit sigil, and then you can have might on crits trait. So you could potentially get 2 might, and then however many people you're attacking all at the same time, you would end up getting multiple stacks of might there. So I think like the tops is like 3, or if you're 100 blading, I think it's like 5. Let's see if we can find it real quick. So the great sword takes 2.4 seconds. Vulnerability is applied before damage, which is nice. Number of targets is 3, but this does vulnerability stacks. And then when we go to 100 blades, the number of targets is 3. So potentially here you could get, 4 stacks of might or something per auto attack, which would be pretty decent. But I think people kind of don't use double mace very often on their warriors. And after looking at this, I think it's kind of something that we need to look back into. You can't really use the greatsword might generation as well as use the system that you use for the mace. But it basically all comes down to the trait that anytime that you crowd control like an enemy or something, it does like a 20-second bleed, and then it does like a 20-second bleed and a weakness, right? And then I got to thinking about the original ruins that we were trying to build with our Roman army, which is the aristocracy ruins. So every time that you apply weakness to an enemy, you get 5 stacks of might. Okay. So let's say if we get a 100% crit chance with the great sword, and we're hitting 3 enemies, and then we have the sigil that on crit can give us 1 crit. So we possibly get like 4 might per swing. Okay, which is still pretty good for a power build, because if you try to use any other weapon, you're not really going to have the best time with the greatsword, because the power build, I mean, you're not going to be able to, say, use sword, shield, greatsword very easily together. You could have the greatsword apply bleed on crit, but it's still only like a 33% chance. So it'd be rather difficult to pull off, I think. I'm not exactly sure how you would make it work, but you would lose a lot of physical damage if you were to build for condition damage on it, on the other weapon. But if you look at the hammer, for instance, these have a 0.9, which is a little bit more than our mace. 2.25 seconds for this. But when you're looking at the weakness implications, you get fierce blow, a knockdown, which would apply weakness, and you get staggering blow, which would apply weakness, and then you get fierce blow, which would apply weakness. So you got 4 skills here, and then a 5th skill on Earthshaker. So potentially this would be best used on, say, a mace hammer build to keep yourself healed. But with the sword, I mean, you're still going to be able to get a good amount of bleed if you do the 100% crit chance, or if you do the weakness on burst skill, you could potentially get 2 procs on the flurry. Whereas like the hammer or whatever, you'd you'd basically just get 1 proc potentially. That's actually an interesting idea because if you use the hammer burst skill, would you proc 2 weakness? I think it would only proc and give you 5 might, but it's an interesting idea nonetheless. Anyway, the concept is the trait gives you anytime that you kind of interrupt your foe or whatever, you get weakness and bleed applied to the enemy. So then when you look at the mace, you think it's simply a physical damage weapon, but it could actually potentially be a hybrid damage weapon. Because the sword skills, as you can see on here, immobilize a foe, or you inflict bleeding, and then bleeding is 6 seconds for 132 damage. But if we go to, let's say, Skull Crack here, and we are looking for body blows, and then with this, you could also, if you take the arms ability, you could take Unsuspecting Foe, which you can see increases crit hit chance against disabled or defiant foes, and this is by up to like 50%. So you could use the mace skill and get 50% crit chance potentially, and this would give you, 3 seconds plus of duration, which would be really strong. You could use Sundering Burst, inflict vulnerability if they hit, inflict additional vulnerability if it's a critical hit. So you could take that. There's also the sword skill that probably what we would take if we took arms that increases your condition damage and expertise, but also decreases your sword recharge skills, which would allow you to use your throw a lot more often, and then you'd be able to pull the rip out of it, which would give you your 10 stacks of might every time that you use that skill in particular, which I think is actually pretty good. But I don't know if the sword would necessarily be the best source of might generation. And out of all this, I mean, we could potentially just stick with the celestial type gear. But for the build to work, we have to have the aristocracy runes, which are fairly cheap compared to, the armor. So I don't know if it's worthwhile for us to apply the armor. The other thing is that with that, we could still use shouts for the condition removal, but it isn't going to help us very much. We're not going to we're like it's not going to heal us on stun break, and it's not going to heal us for using the shout. And then we're going to be going for might generation, so potentially there's something else that we should probably look into if we're going to do it. But if we look at body blows, you can see that the base damage from this is 12 seconds for 264 bleed. And if we go back to Sever Artery, you're looking at 6 seconds of bleed. And even with Flurry, you're looking at 4 seconds of bleed. Right? This has basically a ×2 damage multiplier. That's interesting. Huh. The sword's main ability, the sword's main auto attack isn't very high in damage. But the leap has a ×2 damage multiplier. And the final thrust is ×3. This is still 1.5, 1.5. And then they got 1.76, 0.85. This is interesting. So the offhand axe has a pretty high physical rating, especially the whirl ability. So it looks like if you were going for the maximum like physical damage, it might actually be like this was 4.62. It might actually be like great sword, sword, axe. So this is 2, and these are all 1. This is interesting to me though. 2.5. It's interesting because like a lot of this, I mean, the 100 blades here has a really high physical damage. This is a 2. See, this is ×1, but there's 2 arrows, so it's basically ×2. Fear shot is 1. Volley, see, 3.75. But yeah, the sword actually looks pretty decent here. Is you're getting ×2 on 9 attacks plus bleed. But this right here isn't so good. So the auto attack sucks. But then you have this doing ×2, this doing ×2 ×3 plus bleed. Then impale, you get 1.5 plus torment and cripple. And then you got the rip, which is 2. And then the riposte. It's 1 in bleed, but it's a defensive skill. I find this interesting though. Where's the mace skills again? Skull crack is 1.5, 3-second stun, potentially. Mace bash, less than 1. Pulverize 1.6. And it applies weakness. So counter blow is 2 and applies vulnerability. Pommel bash is really low. Crushing blow 1.5. This gives you might, and then if they're stunned or whatever, you get twice as much might, and then you also get the vulnerability stacks here. And then we have what? Tremor. 3-second knockdown. But basically how this is working is if we go up to pulverize, so this mace smash, it's taking 3 seconds to go through 1 cycle, which is a little slow, but if we get the 20% increase attack speed, or if we had, you know, like a good amount of quickness or whatever, we could potentially get this down. 20% of 3 though should be like, let's see, if we do 20% of 3 seconds, so each second would be like 0.2. So you get like 0.6, so you're looking at 2.4 potentially for this, which would be the same as a greatsword auto attack. You wouldn't get as much damage as, say, this, but you're going to get more condition damage out of it, is the thing. So I think the build concept, this is something like a build that I've never seen any warrior do. The build would be bleeding focused. Aristocracy ruins, so I'll go ahead and look those up for you real quick. So, Crassy ruins. Okay. So they give you condition damage, might duration. So you're looking at 175 condition damage, and then you're getting increased might duration of like 50%. And then you're getting 5 stacks of might for 4 seconds after inflicting weakness on a foe for one, like cooldown is 1 second. So we could do condition damage and increased condition duration. You could do concentration if you thought that you needed uh, additional fury, but if you're taking the arms trait, you could do anytime you immobilize an enemy, you would get fury for like, 5 or 10 seconds or whatever. That plus the trait line ability would end up giving you plenty of fury uptime for the most part. Then you would take probably increased crit chance. So we would do warrior. We're gonna do mace, and then you do sword shield or sword. Something that you never really see. But on the trait lines, you would go defense. You could go Call of the Weak. You get adrenal health. You can do hammer and mace skills, still increase damage when striking a disabled or defiant foe if you want. 20% damage increase. Or you could keep Defy Pain, which I think, that's potentially something that would be fairly interesting to keep because I like Defy Pain. But with the mace skills, I mean, you're going to be able to crowd control enemies a lot easier. So potentially you don't really need this. Because you're gonna get like an AoE knockdown ability. You got a couple of blocks. So it just depends on what you want. But getting adrenaline when you disable a foe could be good. Getting resolution when you block or are struck by a critical hit. So this resolution of 5 seconds, and it reduces the damage that we take by 10%. This is something that's fairly hard to have on a warrior, for instance. It's hard to keep this up, but with celestial armor, for instance, the boon duration would be increased a decent bit. If you had ruins that increased your total boon duration, you could probably get this pretty high, but you're talking about 9 seconds on weapon swaps, and when you swap weapons, you're going to get another block skill up. You're going to be able to block pretty often with 2 weapon sets here. At least 1 block, potentially more ranged blocking. This is if we're not using the shield either, so I don't think we necessarily need the shield. But yeah, and then so if we go for the stance option, I'd probably do last stand because that's what we do with the other stuff, and it gives us a lot of defense and things. Cleansing Ire could potentially still be good. Gives us more adrenaline when hit. So if we wanted a lot of adrenaline gain, we could just go Merciless Hammer, Cleansing Ire. But Stalwart Strength could also be decent here. Stability when you disable a foe would be really nice. plus the 10% damage increase. So you're looking at 30% damage increase with maces and hammers, which is already, a pretty big damage buff. And then you go ideally, I mean, in a group, I would probably go tactics here, and then you could get in power allies, and phalanx strength, and then you would have soldiers focus or leg specialist. This is a 5-second cooldown on that thing too. I mean, this would give you a bunch of might generation, and then the final one would be strength, and then you go might makes right, body blow, and then you would have um, like movement skills, grant stability, 1-second cooldown. I mean, we're only gonna have one movement skill, so it's probably not the best thing to happen. You could do using a healing skill grants might potentially, or we could go for peak performance for a big damage buff. But like even with this build, let's see maximum damage here. We could get 10, 30, 40% in one tree for the mace. And then we would have potentially in the strength tree. I didn't even realize this was here. Gain quickness when you disable an enemy. While you have quickness, your movement speed is increased. Interesting. I didn't notice that was a thing. But here I would say might makes right, playing by yourself. And then you would go body blow and then potentially brave stride or peak performance. But if we're looking at peak performance here, you're already getting 40%. This is going to be like a 55% damage increase bonus. And then potentially you could go here for a lot of quickness. I mean, this is a very low cooldown for a lot of quickness. My issue with this is that our might generation is going to be very high, and if we don't have healing, that's a problem. And we need this Call of the Week so that all our burst skills will apply weakness, and then that weakness will give us might, which would give us more healing. And adrenal health is really nice. These other ones don't really matter so much. But then here, I mean, you're getting reckless dodge, which is really good. Um, body blow is going to be the key to turning the mace into a condition and physical damage weapon, because essentially, so stuns, dazes, knockbacks, pull, pushes, and launches inflict bleeding and weakness. So this means the mace burst skill, the mace 3, and the mace 4 would all apply weakness and bleeding, and they all be at a fairly low cooldown. Um, Control-wise, it's not as much as, say, like the hammer would do, because the hammer has an AoE on multiple enemies and things like that. But with the mace, you're getting the auto attack chain. So every third auto, you would get weakness on the pulverize. So 1.6 on the damage, and you get weakness applied to 3 targets. Now, when you apply the weakness, you're going to proc the Ruins of Aristocracy, which would give you 5 stacks of might for 4 seconds. And there's a 1-second cooldown. The skills that we're using are going to give us 3-second skill rotations for the most part. So you're looking at about 2 seconds delay getting this off. So you're getting 5 stacks of might pretty much every 2 seconds or whatever, 3 seconds. which, is about 1.5 might per second, which when it comes to like sword skills, it's fairly difficult to pull that off. But if you're using a bow, like the mace doesn't have any super strong combos with the bow, but neither does the sword. So like sword shield doesn't necessarily have a ton of things in common with the bow, except for the sword does a lot of bleed damage really quickly. But with this weakness thing, I mean, you're getting twice as long of the bleeding duration. So even though it takes us way longer to auto attack with the mace, every single stun and knockback and stuff can put an additional bleed on that's going to last quite a while. So there is the potential of that working. Like you could go like bow mace if you wanted to, because then you could just like longbow shot, and then you'd be able to uh, mace smack somebody and keep them stunned inside of the burn field, which would be really good. But then you could just have all that increased bleed on your mace if you wanted to as well. But I think with our normal build, like our normal kind of shout build that we're using before, you could probably make like this with celestial gear. I don't even think you'd necessarily need body blow, and you could just heal, crowd control people or whatever. But this would give us like the most AoE might healing and generation, which I think would be the best. But if we do this, we basically lose out on arms trait stuff. So you would almost need a what would you need? You would almost need a second source of fury. But yeah, I think it's like body blow, because the thing is what when you swap to the sword, you have a skill that can give you 10 stacks of might, so it'd be like a burst heal type ability. And then the sword burst skill could potentially give you at least one stack of might. It has a 5-second duration here, so maybe you could proc it twice potentially. But you're looking at maybe 15 might fairly quickly on the sword. But if you swapped that like a 9-second duration, you're looking at 15 stacks of might in 9 seconds, or potentially 20 stacks of might in 9 seconds, which would be about 2 might a second, which would be on par with a great sword, potentially. Um, yeah, so that's a tough call. And you still got the dodge rolls that you can do, the healing skill granting might. Hmm. But if we did take arms, basically Furious Burst would give us additional Fury and also additional crit chance. Then we could still go Signet Mastery, but if we needed additional Fury here, we can go to Opportunist. So you gain Fury and Adrenaline when you immobilize a target, so that's going to be your sword burst skill for the most part. And then you gain condition damage when you have Fury, which would be really good. And then you could go unsuspecting foe, which increases crit hit chance against disabled or defiant foes. So a disabled foe, you'd get a 50% increase in crit chance. So, but that only lasts like, 3 to 6 seconds with the mace, which is actually still a pretty solid amount of time to like lock someone down and get guaranteed crits. If you wanted to do a full 100% condition only build, I mean, or you could go power, condition, or power, ferocity, condition damage, and concentration. And then this would give you, with your mace, you'd be able to get 50% damage increase. And then you could run the that adrenal signet or whatever. It would probably give you, I don't know, like 75 plus crit chance, I would assume, when you disable a foe. Otherwise, I think the Sundering Burst is still probably the best here. But then you could also go Blade Master. So with the sword, this would decrease your cooldown and give you faster might generation on your sword and also more blocks. But Sundering Burst's vulnerability would give you a lot of vulnerability to use. So I think that's probably a really strong ability. But you can still see here is like, this is doing 6 seconds. This is doing 8 seconds. So, I mean, you could keep, 20 stacks of vulnerability up. And in a group, this would be pretty big. But, I think this is just preference for the most part. I think the vulnerability is still really good. The unsuspecting strike could be really good. But you have a chance to inflict bleeding on critical hits. Bleeds that you apply last longer, so you could do this to get the 33% increased bleed duration, which would probably be the best thing. But, it just kind of depends on what you're looking for, I guess. And then if we do dual wielding, you get the 20% attack speed bonus. You can do Furious, which will give us the increased crit, or the increased condition damage on crit, which, goes up to 25 times. So you're already looking at 300, 400 additional condition damage here, as long as you're able to crit. Or you could do Burst Precision, which gives your burst skills 100% crit chance, which I also think is very good. But comparing this to something like Tactics, though, it'd be very difficult because, like, here you could have the Shout Heal, our build that we already pretty much got set up, and we could have Might Healing, which this is basically what we use on the sword bow setup that we have right now anyway. And honestly, it's probably not even worth it for us to necessarily use this on the sword bow. Like, yeah, we get might hitting with the great sword and hitting with our sword, and the might healing does help out a lot in combat, but this isn't really guaranteed if we were going to get rid of this. Because we could easily just go for Berserker Power and get additional other stuff here and just heal off of that. Which would allow us to slot arms. Actually, that's what our thing is over there. We do arms and tactics. And then we slot in the strength if we're in a group. Yeah. So we could do a similar setup just for this. This also means like if we don't necessarily need the extra healing from strength, that we could just slot phalanx and power and keep that, and then we'd be able to slot strength in if we wanted additional healing, but we need body blows. Yeah, that is interesting. Hmm. So might make right, body blow, and then restorative strength. I guess we could go peak performance. if we really wanted to. But, I mean, we also got Burst Mastery that you can run. Ganging Might on Weapon Swap would be, pretty decent. Also, faster weapon swapping is nice. Additional Adrenaline is also good as well. The additional Quickness could be really nice. But I'm not the biggest fan of this tree for the most part. Strength, Tactics, Defense. So, I mean, we could go Shout Heal across like we normally would. This is kind of hard here. Martial Cadence would give us a lot more attack speed with the quickness, potentially. This is also interesting here. Like, so high health, the health threshold is 80%, but high health here is 25% damage increase, which is actually pretty big. And then, so if you're using a mace, like, let's say theoretically we did like you go Phalanx Strength or Martial Cadence, and then you go into Warrior's Cunning, which would give you 25% damage increase. You could go Leg Specialist. So when you cripple them with a skill, it's going to immobilize the target, and then you get increased damage of. This is just when you cripple, you deal increased damage. Huh. Yeah, but this would give us a 10% damage increase. This would help us get them bursted down to like 80%, like closer to. Because, like, you say, like, if you apply a bunch of bleeds, for instance, and then you swap to your mace, and you're beating them up with your mace, 25% damage increase, and then you lock them down at 80%, and the bleeds would still be bleeding them down, and you could potentially get them to 50 and get that final thrust in. But I'm having a hard time deciding on this final trait line, because I think in groups, if we do the double mace, this would be a lot of healing here, like an absurd amount of healing. But we have to have body blow. And then if we don't, you just swap to arms. And I think Furious or dual wielding would probably be the best. Blade Master. So really, I just need the same sort of armor that I'm using pretty much already. I could do Celestial. I could do Pure Condition if I wanted to, but I'm not the biggest fan of Pure Condition damage. Um, I just need to change the ruins pretty much. So if we change from Tempest, we'll be losing 25% condition duration, which in this build, the weakness duration doesn't matter. The vulnerability duration kind of does, but it isn't the biggest thing in the world. Um, so we could potentially make it up if we use the arms trait, 33% bleeding duration here, 53 if we get the bleeding duration on the sword, and then you could get 60 with the condition duration increase of 10% sigil. Um, yeah, it should be at 63%. Then you would need maybe, this expertise. based on your precision. I don't really know how much that would raise it. We can get expertise here if we drop this. So you're looking at 120, potentially a little bit more expertise. Okay. I'll just do the normal thing for now until we decide we need anything else here. Okay. So solo, you would use something like this, I guess, and then in a group you'd fix the phalanx formation, potentially. Um, we're not going to get any healing off of the shout heals. We're not going to get any healing off of stun breaks. So we might have to completely change the overall build idea. Mace-wise, I think we will, let's try and do the Celestial if we can. Let's do a full Celestial set. I don't really know what to use on the sigils and stuff yet on these, so I'm just going to leave those. Um, 20% bleed duration, and then we need 10% condition duration. Then we will do Celestial on all of this. Now, do I think it would be the best build in the world? Probably not. But I could see double mace, like PvP wise, sword, shield, longbow has been my bread and butter for my warriors for a long time. Hammer has also been there for me, but longbow has always been a key to my fighting style. So with weakened blow, all your mace skills are going to apply bleed. That's twice as long as your normal bleed. And then if you had, say, your normal bow with it, like let's say we didn't even use the aristocracy runes, we stuck with everything that we had before. You had 100% bleed duration and 100% burn duration. With a sword, you're looking at putting down your burn field. You get a combo with the fire aurora. You kind of immobilize people, and you get that AoE bleed and all that, which is really good. But if you had double mace, which I've never made a character that just ran double mace, um, you could put down the fire field and then you just do like a 3 to 6 second stun lock in your fire field, which would be pretty crazy. And you could potentially still put on bleeds as well. Every stun, every knockdown would apply bleeds. Okay. So condition damage. It's very odd because the very first Roman build I ever tried to make for my guild, they were all based around aristocracy. I tried like my whole concept around the Roman guild at the very first was based around the aristocracy runes because I was dead set on this rune being like really good. But I ran into an issue because you gain 4 stacks of might after inflicting weakness on a foe. Or I don't remember what it was. It might have been the Fire Aurora. I was trying to do might healing on everybody with the phalanx formation and stuff. Um, and then I was going to use the aristocracy runes to increase the total amount of might generation I was doing. Which would still work because, like with the bow, all of your day shots would give you 5 might. So you get 3 of those right at the beginning. So you're looking at, 5 might going to 5 players, however much health that is per shot, which would be really good. And then with the weakness effect, uh, you would also get um, weakness on the burst skill use. So you get AoE weakness and you get additional bleed procs. And additional might with the aristocracy. So I still like the idea. I think the main thing that I figured out was that might healing wasn't really guaranteed. So I think that was the whole concept was when I first started off, the might healing was potentially really good on its own, but in a, like say like a world v world situation or something, shout heals are just more safe. Is basically what it came down to because so like how the build works right now on the Roman setup is with the celestial gear, my one warrior could potentially heal more swapping to might, and it uses tempest runes. So I can swap to might generation if I want to, and I can heal as a solo player. But the tempest runes, even though I use shake it off and I don't have any healing shouts, if I'm stun broke, it's going to give me 1100 health. And then if I have conditions, it gets rid of the conditions. So that's why that is so good. But if I swap to aristocracy runes, I believe I was using the greatsword trait before, which is what I've used on my condition builds to get might generation for a while now. But this is always a 50% chance, which kind of bugs me a little bit. But when you're using a sword and you're attacking 3 enemies all at once, and you have like 100% or even an 80% crit chance, I mean, you're looking at potentially 2 to 3 might per auto attack. Whereas like body blow, you're getting potentially, I mean, if you're using a hammer, you could get more might off of this, but even then it has a 1 second cooldown between procs. So you can't just like as far as I can understand, you can't use like the hammer burst skill on like 3 enemies and get 3 separate weakness procs, and then proc the aristocracy rune 3 times because it would proc once and you get 5 might for it, but then it would stop. So I don't know how useful this is exactly, like the might generation stuff. Like if you have a shield, you could still like set behind your shield and then come out and get like a big burst of healing. But it's kind of a toss up here. Stuns, dazes, knockbacks, push pulls, and launches. So like if you use a shield, I mean you get in like 20 seconds to get one stun off there, which is kind of a problem. If you're going purely off of body blow, I think longbow, double mace, or hammer double mace would give you like the most like stuns, like the most total stuns and interrupts for the might generation here. But you still got to look for auto attacks and everything else. But the main way with like how the other one works is say when you have the shout heals going, well, you could still use phalanx formation in the Roman build and have 5 warriors next to each other and attack and get however much health, like 400 health or whatever, like every time they get might. I think it's like 80 health for each ally that you apply to. So like each might that you get, um, you're getting 80 times 5, so you're going to be getting like 400 health, and then you get an additional 100, so you're getting like 500 something health for that one might that you generate, which is really good. But the problem being is that if you can't stay on your enemy and attack them, you can't generate might. With the longbows, you kind of can because you can put down a fire field and then you can like burst AoE the fire field to give yourself like 5 or 6 might. So in that sense, I guess you can. But if you ever get to a situation where you can't really apply the might, then you run into a problem, and I wasn't sure how good that was. And so when you go to the shout heals, for instance, um, even with this, like just shake it off. It's doing 2,000 damage or 2,000 heal for one shout use, 20-second cooldown. So like 1,000 health every 10 seconds is basically how you could do that. But it also removes conditions. But then if you're a group of 5 warriors, you get 5 of these, so you're getting 10,000 health, which is like 5,000 health every 10 seconds, and then you're getting all that condition removal. You get, uh, 5 stun breaks that also will heal for 1,100 if you break out of a stun. So potentially the one shout can heal for 3,000 or something per warrior in the group, which is pretty decent. And then if you can't attack or you can't do anything, you can still pop the shout and heal each other for, 2,000 health. So in like a world v world situation, if they run off or they try to like attack you really quick and then like disappear so you can't do anything to them, you could still sit there and pop your shouts and keep each other healed up. And then with the other build, how it works too is like it has Fear Me, so that's also an additional 2,000 health. And with the shout heal trait, this goes down to 48 seconds. And with Celestial Armor and Tempest Ruins, the fear duration goes up to like 5.5 seconds or something on the fear. And then you times that by 5 warriors, you're looking at 25, 30 seconds of fear, an additional, you know, 10,000 health or whatever that you can use here. Also, it applies AoE weakness, so I mean that's just an added benefit. So I don't really know what the best call is on it. Because you could potentially say you could run. God, it's such a toss up here. Because in a group with the other build, you would drop arms potentially, and you would go for tactics. And then if you don't use vigorous shouts, you could go phalanx formation. My Roman setup that I have right now could get away with this. It could 100% get away with this. Just because it's just so well rounded. So this would basically be what the Roman thing is, except for it doesn't use aristocracy runes. It uses Tempest. So that setup is sword, shield, longbow. It's like the standard Roman military setup that we got going. So in this situation, you would look through this trait line. You get Coal of the Weak, so your bow burst skill is going to apply weakness, and it can proc twice. Um, and the reason when you're like solo and stuff, or even in a group if you don't need the additional healing, that we were going arms before, is because it's a hybrid damage build and you can get all your vulnerability from your burst skills with Sundering Burst. That was the main point here, and then Furious gives you additional condition damage. But when you're in a group of players, the way I kind of justify it is that you don't necessarily need as much damage because your group is going to help you apply the damage to your enemy. So in a PvP fight, it'd be more about you focusing your damage all on one target or multiple targets that you kind of ping out compared to anything else. So when you come to tactics, solo here, if you just needed more health, or even in a group if you want to be more safe, you just go straight across, you get the shout heals. That works out really good. So right now it's doing 1800, and then with this out activated, then it's doing 1600. With the Tempest runs, this does 2000-ish. You know, so and then each of you can get an additional shrug it off here, which works really nice. But you could still go Phalanx Strength, Empower Allies, and Soldier's Comfort here. And now you get Might Generation healing, and you could still basically heal off a stun break. And then with the longbow, Cleansing Ire works really good with the longbow. And because basically the longbow hits no matter what. So you can always remove conditions from yourself. So if you need a bunch of condition removal, you can just use this. You can use your shouts. You can slot to decrease the shout cooldown time if you need to. And then you can still keep this middle trait, which is going to give you even more healing, but you don't really need it. So just kind of 50-50. And then sword jump through the longbow fire field gives you the fire aurora. Every time you get attacked, you can get one might, but it has like a 1-second cooldown, I believe, on that as well, which is the original idea that we were going for when we made the build setup. And then 5 warriors with longbow blinding shot. They get 3 uses per warrior. It's like a 10-second cooldown or something. The blind lasts a little bit. They interrupt on hit. So basically, if the warriors alternate their blinding shots, they can just sit there and interrupt and blind people over and over again as much as they want. Then you have immobilization on the bow and immobilization on the sword, which is how you pin down targets. They basically pick them off. So, I mean, it's just a well-rounded setup in that build. But if we were to use the Ruins of Aristocracy, we would lose condition duration, which wouldn't be the biggest thing in the world, but would kind of suck. We lose healing on the shout, so no matter what, we just lose a bunch of healing on that defensive shout. We'd have to find something else to use probably. And we switch to body blows, which could give us might generation. I don't know how much might we actually generate on our other build when we do Forceful Greatsword, but it seems like it's pretty decent because we get like 70 or 80% crit chance on that other build. So you're probably hitting a crit every, attack or other attack. And then you can hit 3 targets, so you got the potential of 3 might, which is, 300, 400 health or something in auto, which is pretty good. And then when you have but that uses the arm trait, which gives you a little bit more crit chance. So who really knows on that? But let's say just with the fire field here, and this isn't even the same amount of healing power you would have. One auto attack would give you 1 might, which 144 health, and then you come down here, and so you're getting 74. And with the Tempest runes, this would be about 80. So you get 1 might times 5. So you get like 400 here. So you get like 500 something health just from getting auto attacked with the fire aurora on your warrior, which also would apply a 100 percent duration increase burn on the enemy, which is already pretty big. Now, if you go longbow double mace, you won't get access to the fire field. I don't know if there's anything that we could use healing wise on our skill bar that would make me feel any better about running double mace. and getting rid of our shouts. You'd have to probably go stances. On my mark could be good, but you'd probably... I mean, you could go signets maybe. Or physical skills. Yeah, I mean, if you do the weakened thing, or the body blows, every physical skill would give you 5 might. So you would want to do peak performance. Disco King? Yeah, I mean, that would be pretty good. Disco King. Generally, like, all my stuff I do is thematic, so, like, each of my warriors all have, like, a different thing that they go for, too. So, like, Odin is generally, like, he's the only one that I've really ran hammers or double mace on for a while. I'm trying to update the Roman guild so more people can play when I try and recruit later on. But to do that, I need to be able to make build types that make sense. So like the Roman military, you could have auxiliaries. Yeah, usually for the most part, I go for themes. It's more or less that I have to have a reason to justify building a character. Like I have to have a reason to justify building an Asura because I don't really play Asura. Like I play humans all the time. I have to have a reason to justify playing a Char. You know, even though like one of my first warriors I ever built was a Char, I don't hardly ever play him. But this Char is great sword, axe was like pure DPS at the beginning, and I never really played him again. Uh, I've deleted so many characters over the years, it's hard. Where'd Odin go? So Odin has usually been like he was my hammer, sword, shield character for PvP at the very beginning of Guild Wars. Like he was well known in the PvP dueling arena area. This isn't. He used to just be like white and black. I think he's using hammer, axe right now. He like his current build right now in PvE is like maximum damage hammer and axes. Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. Like I'm not a big fan of meta builds. Mainly because I was never a big fan of great swords. And warriors are usually like my main class in these games, and ever since Guild Wars came out, like every warrior was running great swords. It annoys me because they're giant anime monstrosity great swords. I like sword shield a lot. But like I have a couple of Roman characters, so the builds are kind of spaced out, but the way the guild worked in the past was so the Roman guild took a long time to prepare and set up, and it took me like a year and a half to find members originally. and it's basically everyone was tired. Like they kept complaining there wasn't a lot of content in the game, so I went and made personal quest lines for the guild to explain items and reasons to go places that would give you things that you needed to progress through the guild. So the guild was basically like another storyline. Um, you had military ranks and civilian ranks, and generally you would need a basic warrior or whatever. So it was mainly warrior focused originally, but the military ranks had uniforms like what this guy has on, and then the civilian ranks could be basically whatever you wanted. So there wasn't any rules there. To progress in the civilian side, you would need votes from other players to progress up. So you have so starting the guild, you would start as an auxiliary, which didn't have any rules. You could kind of do whatever. Then when you became a citizen, you could join the military or you could stay as a citizen. It didn't really matter. Um, then you had nobles and then senators, and then like the emperor was above all that. So to get to a noble, basically you would have to either get voted up from the other nobles that were already in that rank, or you could transition across to the military. So basically, if you're a citizen, you're at the same league as a legionary in the military. If you're a noble, you're at the same league as like a centurion in the military. And they can go back and forth. So you could either wait for a vote or you could join the military. And then to rank up in the military, you could either get a promotion through the Senate or you could fight. Um, so a legionary could try and take a centurion role, but he would have to fight the centurion in the arena. And likewise, a centurion could fight a tribune and such, and they would have to fight in the arena. All arena fights were did in the guild hall, and players were allowed to place bets on them. And then a percentage of the bet money went from the arena fights to the Senate. So players would want to get to the Senate because they got, access to the guild vaults and everything. They got to decide where money went in the guild. Um, so it was just a really big system. We based it off of real life. And the senators or the military could take over the emperor role. So although I built the guild, I built it to where I'm not technically the leader. I didn't really care about leading. I was simply there to ensure that the system operated and that we kind of got things. It was super stressful though, and eventually I ended up getting sick during COVID, and I was out of commission for like 8 months, so it kind of fell apart. But this is one of the first armor sets that we made. So this was the basic Roman legionary, um, and ideally what would happen is, and also I'm thinking about the next time that I recruit for the Roman Guild and rebuild this. I wouldn't say holy knife. I mean, we didn't really have like item stuff. The only kind of lore, like when it comes to like equipment and stuff, the dwarven shield, I forget what it's called. Um, there's like a dungeon thing. You got to find components and forge an item in the furnace. That's how the legionaries earned their shield, and then they had to like go through certain trials to get the gladius or whatever you call it in game. But I didn't know anything about a holy knife. Is there like a lore or like a historical thing with it? Oh. I thought you were gonna say it was that spearhead that stabbed Jesus or something. It's a famous Shakespeare phrase. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's just like what he said when he died, potentially, and then Shakespeare stuck it in a play. Any case, I mean, if you want to get in on this guild at some point, like once I start getting it going again, I'm planning on making a few alterations. Because in the past we put a big emphasis on like we used to have a big focus on bringing low level like level 1 players into like level 80 zones if they didn't want to level up properly, and we would farm with them. So like if you have a big enough group, you can take a level 1 player to the silver wastes and they can actually level there while you're all farming gold. But it's a little bit more difficult on high level players because you have to protect those low levels, and it requires the low levels to be fairly competent at the game because they can get one shot. So it's quite interesting in that sense. But what I'm planning on doing this next time around is I want to make the guild system a little bit more gear focused, something that Guild Wars 2 doesn't have. Um, yeah, well, the guild is pretty much mainly human, but that's why I'm working on kind of justifications in my head of how you could get around that. Uh, Basically, there's not really a certain time period that the guild is set in. And so you could say, maybe you're in the less professional times and you're allowing multiple groups of like, or they could be like an auxiliary unit of Asura or Char or whatever working for the guild. But I think if I do allow any other races besides human in the guild this time around, uh, you need to be in a group. So it isn't going to be like one Char in a group of 9 humans. If you're a Char, you got to have 10 Char. You're going to have 2 groups of 5 or whatever. Yeah. So the mercenary group is a big one. The second thing is that I'm kind of focusing this on cavalry because uh, a lot of times, like throughout the Roman type of history timeline, they used kind of mercenary cavalry in a lot of battles. And I know like a lot of players don't necessarily want to like give up their mounts, but there's a big emphasis on like actual military tactics and things like that. But I kind of want to see if I can make the guild more gear focused this next time around. So how it would work in theory in my head is I have a challenge that I've been doing on one of my characters, or I did do on one of my characters. I ended up deleting them. Um, yeah, do Norns for Gauls and stuff. I'm not opposed to that, but I think the caveat here would be if you're in a Norn group in the Rome Guild, you need to be in a group of Norn and you'll need to have some sort of common uniform, not, like crazy shining light stuff. It needs to be somewhat realistic. However, if the group leader or something wants to wear an item that's a little bit more magical or whatever, they would be able to. Um, but the idea with the gear focus thing is that you ever seen the zero to hero runs on Guild Wars? I think there's like, well, there's at least one streamer that's did them, but basically, um, instead of buying your gear and stuff on the trading post, I've had a bad habit of doing this. So ever since I've been able to get money in Guild Wars, I've never went back to just playing the game and finding gear and stuff. I've always just bought it. So the idea here would be that if we go for a gear focus setup in the guild, you would make a new character or whatever for the guild or use an old character, but you would have one armor set that would be set for the Rome guild. And then you would just use gray gear, and then you would get upgrade. Like you would find your gear pieces, you'd actually have to find them in game and upgrade your gear as you go along instead of just buying whatever you wanted. Because I mean, the basic Roman like military type build that we have works really good just by itself. You don't really need any specific armor stats for it. But like the more professional legionaries would be like full set gear people. Yeah, the legendaries are a pretty big one. It takes time to do those map completions though. I've had to change my playstyle to try and actually finish the map completions just in my spare time. So you stay motivated to keep going for the legendaries? That kind of sucks. 4 times. To me, like, I used to have, like, I kind of liked the legendaries when they first came out, but it was mainly like Bolt and Juggernaut. But then eventually, like, the Juggernaut didn't really like fit my stuff well enough because when you take it out, it like changes your armor color. So I kind of lost interest in it. So I never really had any interest in any of the legendaries for the most part. But what is it? That prophecy shield, I'm thinking about looking into it now though, because I just made a human uh guardian. So I might go for prophecies, but are you just trying to unlock all the legendaries? Hmm. You just have a specific legendary that you're going for? You're trying to unlock actually all of them? A lot of people they use the legendaries for like gold storage. Like they keep the legendaries to trade for gold because you can only carry so much gold. Ah. That makes sense. Ghost Norn and a Party Asura. Iron Legion's alright for a char. I never really see anyone do the Frost Legion for char. I thought that would have been more popular. Hmm. Flame Legion. Yeah, that's what I'm doing with this. I never play Elementalists. I've avoided them for I don't know how long. I have this one, which is like a bag opener, and it's my Roman merchant guy from forever ago. But this guy's going to be a Flame Legion char at some point. Yeah, I mean, I've tried to solve some things with people on Reddit. Like I try to go in between the two clashing sides and find solutions. And there's something I've gotten really interested in in the game, like as I've came back, and I tried to put it as like a potential thing that they could. Yeah, I mean, there's like people that want like elite specs during every expansion, and then there's some people that's like, I think it's too much work for the devs, so they want to not have to force them to do it. So like I'll try to find a middle ground and post it. Generally, it doesn't go so well, but so like elite specs, for instance, they've come out with elite specs every expansion, but every expansion they've been killing a dragon, which would release energy into the world, like additional magic. So it would kind of make sense that maybe you get additional abilities. But once that's over, unless they're making the bosses drop magic or something, if they wanted to change it, they could just connect it with the lore in a way to where they could then adapt to something else. Like skill captures, signet captures, whatever. But um, my interest is like the people keep having the debates between additional races to play as a starting character. So they want uh, the devs to go and make a race from top to bottom, add them to the core game story, everything, so people can play them from beginning to end. Um, the players that want the additional races do not want anything besides what they call doing it right and adding them to the complete storyline and having their own area, their own starting zone, everything else. And people that are at the end game content don't really care about playable race because it isn't going to change anything for them. It doesn't give them any content. So the idea that I talked about online was basically, well, one, if they're going to give them a starting zone and all that stuff, they're going to need to combine it into the map that's already existing because there's no reason to add more starting zone. Like even the base core game, they have 5 starting zones. So even if you had one starting zone, like imagine if you had one starting zone in Corteria and you could like play the 5 races or whatever you want, then that means that they could have had 5 times the in-game content in the core game. So the more starting zones that you have, it's just going to be more fluff. Like there's no reason to go to them or anything. But tonics are kind of something that caught my attention as I've been playing the game. So On my warrior that I'm going through the storyline now with, I started using the Coda tonic because I found it and I bought it off of a trader. I think in Bitterfrost, and I actually like really like the look of it and stuff. Well, there's a Cloud Seeker tonic, which is an upgraded version. It's bigger, has better armor, all of that stuff. And what I find really interesting about the tonics compared to the races, and I think they could still add the races to the game properly, like everyone wants or whatever, but I think they can do it in a way that is basically at the end of the new content. So if you use a tonic, I like the idea because you can have any single voice from any character, male or female, um, on the tonic, which is crazy. Like, because one of my big things with human characters is I hate the voice. I like the voice of the Norn and I like the voice of the Char, but I can't put those on the human character. But with my Coda tonic, I can have this Char's voice on the Coda when he's talking, and with the human, I can have the human's voice on the tonic on the Coda. I could play like a female Asura and put their squeaky voice on the Coda if I wanted to. But how the system would work in my head is they've already got things in the game already without adding anything else that lets you transform your appearance and do quests in the open world and stuff for enemy factions and things like that. So all they have to do is add a tonic. So let's take Coda for example. You go in, you trade whatever map resource, you get hold of the tonic, you activate it. Activating the tonic allows you to socialize into the Coda's world, and then you can start taking on Coda quests. And then every single Coda that they've already made with different uniforms and suits and stuff from all over the game, they could add those in as additional content to collect, and change your Coda's appearance. Okay, that would be stage one. Well, yeah, that's one way that they could add, them to the game. True, but the thing is with the races is they could have any number of storyline things come in. They could even have them come in with like at the Battle of Claw Island. They could just like sail in and get stuck in the battle and kind of get sucked into the thing there. But the problem with the races that is the big debate between players that want in-game content and newer players or that are just, I don't know if they're newer, but other players that just want a playable race is that for the devs, they're going to have to build that race, they're going to have to build the lore. The players want them to build a starting zone. Then they're going to have to go and make all the armors and weapons and everything work on every single race that they add to the game. You got all the voice acting for all the character. Just there's a whole lot of stuff. Yeah, and all that stuff that they're doing means that they're not going to have in it, that's just a playable character. So they put the new character in. It does nothing for the game besides players that want that character, which is going to be very minimum, right? So my idea is basically you add the in-game content for the races, and then you add the playable race at the end. That way, everything mashes together. And basically, how it works though is you would get the tonic. It would open up a bunch of new quest lines and storyline content that's like secondary to the main storyline. So in-game players would be able to go back to starting zones. It means they can also reuse all the maps that they already have, which makes every map have way more content. So say like even the Scrit or whatever in Queensdale, like you have a Scrit tonic, you get to go there, you get to socialize with the Scrit, do Scrit stuff. Maybe you can even participate in the other side of the events, like the Scrit going stealing things from those farmers. You go over there and you try to steal stuff. You got other players that are like bonking you on the head with maces and things, you know. So it gets an interaction between older players and newer players in the events and things like that. It would be kind of interesting. Um, it doesn't necessarily have to be PvP because there's a lot of events that are more or less just like tag, like Skritter kind of, you're trying to get the thing and you're trying to run back, and maybe you just get participation. You don't actually have to, win the event. But you progress through the storylines, you'd be able to unlock more tonics to change your script's look or whatever, which lets them reuse assets that they already have in the game, as well as give you additional things you can unlock, which would make your script more unique compared to other players. And then towards the very end, they could have like the top of the line end game tonic, which would be like universal script tonic or something. And basically, that would be right before they add the playable race to the game. So everyone would be able to enjoy the content. The in-game script content, or the in-game script tonic, would be like you activate this tonic, but your player gear stays visible. So that would be after they've already did the work for adding all of the armors to the individual playable races. And then all they would have to do from that is to add a new playable race. And what happens there is older players that want more in-game content immediately get access to in-game content or additional game content without having to make a new character. Okay? And then new players during that period wouldn't be really penalized for not having the in-game content or not having the tonic or whatever really at the beginning, because they're still going to get access to the tonic. But when they add the race to the game, um, that just means that new players are going to get the option to choose one race and get access to that race's quest lines at the beginning of the game. But every race would have their own quest line. So it's like if you started with the Skrit as your main character, you might get access to additional Skrit quest lines at the very beginning of the game, but you won't have access to, say, like a Koda's, quest lines, or an Asura's additional quest lines. Um, and they've already gotten the number of like Skrit bases and things like that. Yeah. Well, thanks for hanging out, man. I need to go to bed too. I was just hopping on here real quick. So you have a good one, man. And thanks for following and showing up and liking. I'll be finishing the Icebrood Saga on my new character this week, and then my old guild lord's coming. We'll be doing the End of Dragons. So if you want to watch that, you can. I just kind of go over lore and like talk about things, little snippets that you see like in the game that I never really paid attention to before. Actually, going to go through all of the game with all these new characters at some point. All right. All right, so everyone that tuned in here, just thank y'all guys for watching and stuff. I'll try to think this build out a little bit more. I'm gonna head to bed. When we come back to this, we'll look at this tomorrow before we start playing, probably. I gotta figure out if I'm gonna try and build this on a Roman character or something. So y'all guys